Hi, everybody, and welcome back to yet another cracking installment of the Matt Brown Show. This is the Built in Texas series, and with me on the line, although he's currently in New York, the startup is in fact from Texas, but his name is David Bettenhausen, the one of the co-founders and CEO of Aerotrax Technologies. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Really a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's cool, man. So first time founder, but doing some cool things, and so I thought I'd connect you to my audience around the world. Um, but for those of them, those amazing fans of mine who catch the show every day, every week, um, and for them who haven't heard about you and kind of like what you guys are up to, why don't you give us a bit about your background and give us the elevator pitch about Aerotrax Technologies.
Absolutely. And yes, typically we're based in Dallas, Texas. Right now I'm happy to be on the road in New York City. But we actually founded the company in New York here, actually out of this office, Bryant Park. And our company is focused on digitally tracking the entire life cycle of every aircraft part and component in the air and on the ground. And we started out in an entrepreneur residence program. My co-founder came up with the concept when he was an IT analyst at one of these large aircraft engine repair shops down in Boca Raton, Florida. And he came to me with the idea, and I had done a couple of projects in consultant capacity with data integration, systems integration, as well as network infrastructure design. And so we put our heads together and started building with a single North Star, if you will, of digitally tracking the life cycle of aircraft. And it's been interesting how we've gotten there. And right now, what we are primarily doing is offering a way for airlines and aircraft operators to share data, to collaborate, and to communicate in real time with their third-party vendors and vice versa. So their vendors being suppliers, maintenance, repair, and overhaul service providers, as well as OEMs. So it's been about us, my background, and sort of what we're focused on as a company today and where we're taking it in the future.
Cool, man. So, what's the issue that you guys are trying to resolve? Is it supply chain specifically, or is it about data sharing between different companies in the supply chain of building an aircraft, for example? What's the actual issue?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So I guess taking a step back, looking at the market as a whole. So aircraft, they're really complex assets, right? They get us from point A to point B, and we don't really think about it as consumers. We just walk onto the plane and show up at the destination. Hopefully, don't result in any sort of maintenance failure, get stuck on the tarmac, or no part being signed off at the right time. And so all of the inner workings and the complexities that allow us as consumers to purchase a ticket seamlessly, step onto a plane seamlessly, and fly seamlessly to our destination is really a fascinating industry and fascinating problems and processes and systems that we see as a real opportunity in improving. And so from an aircraft side, you have all these hundreds of thousands of parts that make up the aircraft. And so every single one of them has to be deemed safe to fly with different certifications and come from the right places. And in order to do that, it takes a monumental group of people charging in the same direction, using the right process, using the right systems. And the core problem right now is that these airlines, these operators, they do a great job of storing data and understanding it. But it's tough for them to get access to a lot of their data because they rely on third parties to keep that aircraft up and running. And so fundamentally, what we do today is we help airlines and third party repair facilities share data throughout repairs and maintenance events that happen that are able to keep that plane up in the air in revenue service. And so, as we continue to build in this space and offer different services to these repair facilities as well as airline operators, I think that core of the data sharing piece will always be a component and the value proposition around what we're doing to avoid double entry and improve safety and compliance in the space. But there's a lot of interesting things that we can do with the data to provide more value. So yeah, that's the core of the problem. And I want to take a step back to give some color into sort of the underpinnings of this almost $1 trillion industry that we operate in.
Yeah, I was going to say, so two things. I don't know, maybe you know, maybe you don't, but I suppose out of everyone I know, you're probably the best guy to ask this question, but how many parts actually go into like a 747, say, or Dreamliner or a 737 Boeing? Like, on that, like, do you have an idea, like, how many actual parts go into a plane?
Yeah, I believe that the wide body jets are somewhere to the tune of 6 to 7 million parts. And so it's, yeah, you can think of that. And there's also piece parts that compose a larger asset. Within an engine, there's hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of little piece parts or components and nuts and bolts when you add them all together. So yes, it's super interesting space to be in, and I think, yeah, when the deeper you get into it, the more you appreciate all of the amazing people that are involved in the industry that we never know of, that we never see, that just keep that plane running.
Yeah, I always almost sit there on the plane, and like I flew to New York, funny enough, a couple weeks ago, and you take off and you're like, this thing's not going to take off. You know what I mean? Like you just,
Mhm.
it still doesn't make sense in my, for a lot of people, I'm sure, like when you take off in a 747, especially on like the international flights, it's like you don't think it's possible. You know what I mean? Like, how do you fly 500 people and luggage and it's metal in the air, and somehow it gets there? You know?
Mhm. Totally. And it's so beautiful too. And it's a great analogy too. I mean, the innovation that has happened from at an aircraft level to reduce carbon emissions, to be more energy efficient, to be, less complicated from a parts perspective is incredible. It's one of those exponential curves. And I mean, now it's trending towards there's not much more room for improvement that we can do, um, but the systems and processes that keep that plane up in the air have not changed in 40 years. So we've gotten great improvements at the aircraft level. However, underneath the hood, what we actually call under the wing, there's still a lot of room for improvement uh, in keeping these aircraft up in revenue service.
Mm. Yeah, I mean the average price of a 747, I just googled because I'm curious. It is like 380 million uh, dollars, and you have millions of parts from. It's almost like it's kind of like what SpaceX or Tesla have done. Have like in terms of partnering with a lot of companies to innovate, to create a product that's truly like holy shit. And so when you have all these parts moving to and fro and so forth, managing the supply chain is obviously quite a key thing. So you said it was $1 trillion problem. Is that correct, or market opportunity?
It's a $1 trillion industry. As far as market opportunity goes, we believe in the military as well as commercial side, it's around 70 billion to offer not just supply chain management and sort of this automation across data sharing, but also digital aircraft tracking. And so that gives the extra layer of the opportunity model. But yeah, the $1 trillion is essentially it's a little bit under that. I think 2019 levels topped out at 860 billion for global revenue in the commercial aviation world.
Mm.
That's what I was referring to.
So thank you for that. So you were right. Also, the 747 is 6 million individual parts. It's just shit ton. So
That's a lot.
so let's talk about the problem here. Like if you think about, I don't know, maybe it's not Boeing, maybe it is, or it's some other company that's involved in the aerospace sector and in the manufacturing and supply chain. Like what's the current status quo then? Like like what's going on? Like you have SAP ERP, for instance. I'm imagining more sophisticated companies would use, for instance, at a hefty price. But what's going on status quo wise? Like what does supply chain look like in the aerospace industry?
Totally. No, it's a great question. And the deeper you go into it, the more kind of opportunities you unearth. And what we see, I'll start in the area that we're focused on, which is what we call the aftermarket. So you have new parts and you also have used parts. New parts are the initial coming from the original equipment manufacturer, like the OEMs, like Boeing and Airbus. You also have tier one suppliers, tier one OEMs like GE, Safran. But when you get into the aftermarket space, there's this huge network of distributors, brokers, suppliers, maintenance, repair, overhaul service providers, as well as the OEMs, the like Airbus and Boeing and the likes. And all of these sort of stakeholders exist to keep that aircraft up in the air. And so the airline, as an airline supply chain manager, I have a network of anywhere from 200, sometimes up to 400 different suppliers or vendors that I rely on in what's called an approved vendor list. And right now, if there's a part that is deemed, requires maintenance, you pull it off the plane at the turn, so at the gate, throw it on the shelf, and then at the end of the day, a supply chain manager will get a notification, usually through SAP or another ERP system or maintenance information system, and it'll trigger a notice to say, hey, look, we just pulled this part, we replaced it with another. This part that's on the shelf needs to get fixed. Send it to the right vendor, or this part needs to get exchanged. But we need to have this part in inventory because we know for a fact within the next, week and a half, there's going to be another plane coming in that's going to need that same part that we just pulled from the shelf in the first place. And so what happens then is this supply chain manager will look through their network of vendors. They may send out a request for quote or request for proposal. What likely happens a lot of the times is they have contracts in place with a lot of these different vendors, and so they'll send out a part on contract to a different facility in order to conduct the repair, so they can get it back and put it on the plane again. And so what happens in this exchange right now is that the airline supply chain manager loses all visibility into what's happening to their part. And so that it essentially becomes a black box. And if you're a large airline that has hundreds of aircraft in your fleet, you've got a really tight team that's managing hundreds of suppliers or vendors, thousands of orders, and billions of dollars. And right now, the way that they're tracking these things is through phone calls, emails, faxes. So if they want to get a status report from a different vendor, they pick up the phone, they call them, they send a couple emails back and forth. But when we talk about the volume at which these transactions are moving from a dollar perspective, as well as a total amount perspective, it's tremendous. And so fundamentally, what we want to do is offer a way that's simple for airlines and these third-party vendors to share status updates, because people shouldn't be doing these reports. It should be technology. Let the people work on strategic thinking and strategic resource allocation. And so that's fundamentally what we believe in. And that same visibility can be applied at even lower levels, right? And understanding lead times on when a part that maybe the vendor that I'm using has a sub vendor or a subcontractor that is relying on something else, and so it can be tiered. And so it's these use cases that come around and can drive a lot of value, and we're talking value in the millions of dollars when we're saving hours of time, per transaction. And so this at the transactional level, it's pretty significant, and then you multiply it based on the customer by the quantity, and it becomes it becomes game changing. So that's the status quo and sort of how we're focusing and thinking about it.
So a lot of it, I imagine, is pen and paper based. It's really around the exchange of information between aircraft suppliers, and I suppose the issue really in a succinct statement is the issue is around data mapping, isn't it?
Yes, exactly right. The data mapping issue.
Mm-hmm. So what have you guys built then, or what are you building? What have you, is it like a workflow type thing? Like walk us through what your product does.
Yes. Great question. So to start, there's a couple different ways we can get going. There's some elements that we built. What's really exciting is we can get up and running very quickly by offering just our dashboard to customers to say, hey, would it be useful if you had your data shown like this in real time every day? And so we can take historical data and show them what the dashboard would look like at a single point in time based on historical data. And then what we can do is say, okay, if you would like, we can also build these capabilities on it if you continue to share data in a continuous form, whether it's an integration or a secure file transfer. Or even if it's just notifications being spit out from their ERP, so we can pick it up and structure it and then surface it in a way that they can drive decisions. So that's one key just from an implementation standpoint. But fundamentally, what it is workflow and collaboration platform. So you hit the nail on the head there, Matt, in asking around that. And it works in a similar fashion to Zendesk as well. So these workflows can be created that can trigger notifications to people's inboxes so that they can drop in a PDF or an Excel into an email that can then be mapped back to the proper workflow that's related to the proper order number, whether it's a purchase order or repair order. And we can store that data in with the right user information as well as the right facility information that it's coming from in order to prove that all of these data elements were shared at the right time from the right place, from the right person to the right person, and were approved throughout that process. And so that's at the core of what it is. And then again, you can build a lot of really nuanced elements around that. So can you do time tracking to improve operational performance? Can you do order specific messaging to allow people to communicate faster? Is there a way on top of that to improve inventory management? And so all of those elements are built in right now. The key and the magic is really in getting that implementation going and integrating in a fast and seamless way.
Mm-hmm. So here's a silly question. How do you build something when you don't have knowledge of an industry?
It's a very good question. And I would say I view it as a strength that we came in without industry knowledge. Now, you can put us in the room with anybody and we can go deep into any type of acronyms. We can drop part numbers, and so we do have industry knowledge now, but it's learned. And it wouldn't be that case without sort of a passion for learning, a deep passion for understanding the nuances of the problem and wanting to solve it for the people that are having these issues. And also without partners. We have learned so much from so many great people. And one of the very first things we did before we even registered as a business, like 7 months before we registered as a company, when we just started mapping out the problem, is we went on LinkedIn and we reached out to anybody that went from or that graduated from our alma mater, which is Villanova University, that worked at Boeing, American, Southwest, and we said, "Hey, do you have 30 minutes for an informational interview?" And we talked to them and we'd ask them questions on what processes they use, what systems they use, where do they spend their time, where would they like to spend their time, what would they like a system to look like? And so it's triangulating that sort of those questions from literally thousands of people over years of time, and having the patience to wake up every day and know that if we just get a little bit better today, we'll be on track for tomorrow. And so this industry doesn't change overnight. We never expected it to. And so we've been around for over 3.5 years now. And we're now moving the needle, which is exciting.
Mm-hmm. And just for everyone's information, this isn't about business optimization. This is really around pre-built workflows that enable better sharing of information across business units and companies and suppliers.
Mm-hmm.
That's correct, right?
Exactly right. Yep.
Okay. So you guys have been around for 3.5 years, obviously to build something. By the way, I actually agree with you. I think coming into an industry without knowledge is actually an advantage. It sucks because you have to do heavy lifting, but you're not coming in with any existing premises. You know what I mean? Like, we're going to accept the same thing because it's been this way for 50 years.
Exactly.
And so that's what I love about startups, because they literally are changing the way things are. So it is an advantage, but obviously you have to fail a lot in that process. There's a lot of knowledge you need to gain from the incumbents, and so that you can build something that's different. So in that context, you obviously made a lot of mistakes. What would you say has been your greatest failure, and what did you learn from it?
Hmm, that's a good question. There are a lot. I'll take it. I would say I'll answer it with two because there's tons, and if you're not learning from them and you continue to repeat them, you're destined to overall fail. But there's two separate ones that I'd be happy to share about. One is underestimating how challenging it is to raise money, and this also takes into account some of the nicer times in the bull market. And now that we're in a bearish market and the pendulum has sort of swung from super investor or super founder friendly to more investor driven and deliberate sort of conversations on the investment side, it's even more important. And that underestimating how difficult, uh, how long it will take, but more so underestimating how little I knew about it was a huge failure. Because there's actually very few people in the world that have successfully raised venture capital money and built venture backable companies.
Hmm.
There's a very small subset of people, and so without proper mentorship from those people, those founders who have done it before, it's you're just going to be running all over the place and spending time in areas that you really shouldn't have. And fundraising should be a full-time job. I've heard it 100 times. I'm sure every one of your listeners has heard it a lot, but it is a full-time job when the time is right. And so for me, one of the biggest things that I learned is to build a process around it. And so, our first fundraise took us 7 months. The second time we went out, it was like 2 weeks. And so that time, there was a lot that led into it. Biggest things for me were investor updates. Consistent monthly, at least, investor updates to not only your current investors, but to also future ones. Another was lists to target and finding the right inroads in and getting warm intros. And then a third was, you know, driving some sort of reason to invest. It shouldn't be mapped to us staying alive. It really shouldn't be about survival. It should be, we would like to bring this money in to accomplish this strategic milestone, which gets us to this moment. And then that moment gets us to the next money in, which is the next strategic milestone, and so on and so forth. So that was important. I would say the other element of failure uh, was around being a bit too trusting of uh, of people in our day in some of the earlier days, and you want to be trusting of people, but there is elements of you know whether it's a new investor coming in or a new team member coming in, everything is about culture and the team, especially at the early stages. And so what I have learned over time is that you have to protect that, and you have to protect the team, and that means bringing in the right people, being responsive to your current team members. Uh, it also means partnering with the right investors, people that not only can help and support you today, but share values and see the future that you're building and appreciate it. So those are the two things I would say are the most important learnings and
Hmm.
failures for me.
Yeah, those are two very important ones too from my experience. Curious to double click on, how do you know who's the right type of investor? I think oftentimes, like, I actually help startups raise money,
Mm-hmm.
which is a new thing. But because I've raised money before, and like also now being here in the US, like everyone's on some kind of a raise or funding cycle at some point. Like if you're in the startup space, not a small business, and everyone's talking about the market right now, and it's not the best, like you mentioned. It was like the $1 million coffee was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's not, potentially, but there are deals happening every day. And to your point, like you have to be persistent around, you know, being successful in it. The struggle though is like, well, fuck it, I've got to build products, I've got to hire people, I've got to go to market, I've got to do all these things. And now, as you touched on, like funding is a full-time gig, so how do you manage that as well? And then you got, I mean, obviously you're a young guy, but like I got two kids, and we will have these other personal things, maybe you play ice hockey, you know what I mean? Like you have other life goals too. So it becomes quite a friction point for a lot of founders. So what would you say then is the key to success for funding a startup now? Like what would you say, what would you put that down to? Is it persistence? Is it having, you know what I mean? And then when you are successful, like how do you choose like the right type of investor?
Yeah, it's a really important question, and I just spent some time yesterday. I think it was like an hour and a half, 2 hour call with really fantastic people, John Durbin and Chris Trailer, and they run sort of like a fundraising academy, so something similar. And that was through one of our investors, Capital Factory, that set that up. And I asked a similar question, and Chris gave a really great response and this is something I believe in and I feel was a big difference from round one to round two for us, and it's likely going to help support us as we go to this next phase, whenever it is, probably early next year, which is you have to align on what the investors get excited about, and that should be your milestone to then raise off the back of, because it's really difficult unless you are a founder who has had a very successful exit before. It's really difficult to raise money without that track record. And now, if you do have amazing pedigree and you built and launched a massive product at Google that has touched 1 billion people, or at AWS in a similar fashion, I'm sure you can also use that as sort of, I built this and scaled this, because that's essentially what this asset class requires, is to build and scale. And so I think that's incredibly important, is understanding what that milestone is that investor needs to see. And I'll give you, for instance, like on the hardware side, maybe it's just a demonstration of a smaller prototype that gets you to the next round, to then say, now we can scale this out to a bigger size, right? In the software side, maybe it's a POC, a paid pilot with a large customer that then can be underwritten to say, okay, now let's implement, let's build out the production grade version, and then that lands 1 or 2 customers, and then you go forward and you raise another round off the back of that to then scale the sales process, because you're able to repeat it twice already. And so it's those things. And then the other element of it is finding the right people. And this gets to sort of the earlier part of your question, which is how do you know who's the right investor? I would say you have to ask questions, and you have to understand who they are as a person. Sometimes it's important to, especially if it's someone new, and it's not through a warm introduction, is to spend time with them in person, shake their hands, have coffee, have breakfast, lunch, whatever it is, and then also maybe get a recommendation from somebody that you admire, that you feel is connected enough to you that you can see eye to eye with. And so I think that's really important. But that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is, do you align with their thesis? So that right investor is not just someone who you feel is a good fit, but they feel you are a good fit too. Because if you're not aligned there, you're going to waste your own time. And so, if you're a consumer business, no point in reaching out to somebody that does, deep tech. And so, yeah, it's interesting. And those are sort of my 2 takeaways in how to think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, as much as they're doing due diligence on you, you should be doing the same DD effort on them. It's like, also, what if you walk me through your last like 5 investments, and what was your exit period? Because if they're saying to you, I'm in it for a 10-year haul, and then you look at the last 5 exits and like 4 of them are like 3 years, then there's your answer.
Yep. Totally.
Yeah. Cool, man. So that's awesome. How much have you raised to date then?
So we've raised a little under $1 million. And going for another round in the next couple months.
Awesome. Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
So, So I quickly want to talk to you about struggle. So when we're doing these things, we're struggling raising money, we're struggling with like whatever it is, building products, talking to customers or probable customers, and what are you struggling with today?
It's a good question. I think uh, I'll say two things. One is sales are difficult in the enterprise space. Sales are even more difficult in the when you're selling to airlines and industrial companies. I think there's always been a deep fear of change, I think, within these organizations. And we're starting to see that change. We're starting to see digital transformation projects come in. We're starting to see a movement towards cloud. And so these trends are positive for innovation in these markets, which I think is a great thing. Uh, and so with us, it's like, how do we make sure our customer feels safe and trust us with this stage and with this contract? And so for us, what's important is security. And so we've gotten SOC 2, Type 1, Type 2 credit. We've gotten ISO 27001 certified. And so all of that is key in that sales process. I would say the other thing that I'm struggling with that I think will always be a constant struggle, and for us, it's like, how do we continuously improve here? Is the gap between product and customer requirements really and engineering. And so closing that gap, the companies who can close that gap can deliver and innovate faster than anyone in the world. And so that's what we want to be. We want to be shipping out new features on a weekly, maybe even a daily basis when we scale the team a bit, and that will offer an unreal customer experience, and that's what we want to strive for. So that closing of the product and engineering gap, but really it's customer requirements to product to engineering, keeping that as tight as possible is critically important. And so we've done a ton of things to work on that, and we're always going to improve in that area. I don't think it'll ever be perfect. Nobody has it perfect. You can look at the Amazons, the Googles, the Microsofts of the world, and you can learn from them, but it's not going to work perfectly. And so for us, it's a constant state of improvement in that area as well.
Mm. So you said you've been at this now for like 3.5 years. If I gave you the keys to my incredible time machine uh, and asked you to go back to yourself on day one, what advice would you give yourself about building this business on day one?
Mm, it's a good question. I would say get in a technical co-founder as soon as possible. And we are a software company, and we can be dangerous, but we've never sold, and commercialized enterprise software products before, my co-founder and I. And so for us to come in and the first, you know, couple of years just be doing it on our own with other engineers who were great but didn't also have that experience was a challenge, and it extended times. And I guess what's good for us is the patience has sort of paid off because we're sort of at this nexus point in the market where the problems have been exacerbated by a lot of the supply chain constraints and the pandemic, and now the demand snapping back. So it hasn't killed us. If it had killed us, that would have been bad, of course. But it hasn't killed us, and it has made us even more appreciative of that technical leader. And so we brought on a head of engineering in April of this year, 22, Mark Pace, and after a few months, we're like, wow, what a game changer. So we promoted him to CTO and co-founder in September of this year, and yeah, I think it is night and day. So that would be my biggest piece of advice to younger self is also don't underestimate the actual technology build out, because you're a software company. You need
Mm.
that technical leadership.
It's an interesting challenge. Like I've built quite a few tech products, just having another one uh, acquired now, more like an IP sale. And so I've built, development teams internally. I've also outsourced it. So it's there. I mean, and then like you get different people subscribe to different doctrines, don't they? They're like, one's like, well, no, you must develop the competency in house. The other one's like, no, no, outsource it and then bring it in house. But like, it creates complications either way you go, especially when you're a startup and you're trying to move fast. Sometimes I don't think outsourcing to India is the best idea, if especially with the time difference. But sometimes it is. Would you ever outsource your technical capability? Would you say, in hindsight now?
So I mean, it's a trade-off, right? It's like time over burn, right? Are sort of the levers of trade there, and maybe in dire cases, I just think at this point, and I guess this gets back to some of the earlier comments around team culture and protecting the team. Uh, we've found that after years of building, all it takes is one or two people. When you're at this stage with such a tight knit group, one or two people to say like, hey, are they really pulling their weight? What exactly is he or she working on right now? Because everybody else is, you know, pedal to the metal, just going straight for it. And so if if you have that type of doubt start to creep in, that's when I think things start to go wrong and people stop communicating as quickly. Release schedules start to get delayed, and so I think to outsource now would have to be a dire situation, but we wouldn't be completely opposed. I think if there's a need to ramp up resources at a faster rate than we humanly can possibly do it, we could take a look at that option. But yeah, it's such an interesting trade off because over the years we've gone back and forth, and it sounds like you've also played both sides of it as well, Matt.
Yeah. So what does success look like then for you guys? I mean, where are you guys going? I mean, obviously, I don't know of any other, aerospace supply chain startup. You know what I mean? Like, it's quite a unique space,
Mm-hmm.
which is exciting, I believe. Yes, it's hard, but I think it's also exciting because it's the hard things is where the value sits. But so, where you're sitting at right now, you're obviously funded. You've got clients. You're on this kind of scaling trajectory. Um, what does success look like for you now? Like, where are you guys going? What's the ultimate contribution you're hoping to make here?
Yeah, it is such a fascinating question. It's one of my favorite interview questions too. Is what's the most successful project you ever worked on? Because there's a lot of different ways you can look at it, right? Like success for me would be providing value to all of our customers and uh, or all of our target customers. So what that could look like in a tactical way is onboarding 100 companies next year onto the platform. And so that's like from a numbers perspective, what we can do. And we can onboard them in a number of different ways in a low touch, just respond to this email that's structured and we'll pick up the data into our system and map it right. Or it can be an integration. And that's definitely higher touch, but it's also more value. And so, yeah, I think for me, one of the ways that I think we can drive the most success early on is just by getting out there on the road. Our customers are airlines. We want to fly their aircraft to their headquarters and meet with them, and show them what we can do for them. So that's important for me. And I think as we continue to look forward into time and see, what could this company really look like? I'm really amazed at a lot of the sustainability efforts across the industry, and I think we can play a role in that from a metrics perspective. So after we get a bit more data and understand sort of what the implications of offering to repair a part versus buying a new part, sort of the trade-off between that from a carbon emission standpoint, mapping that sort of to some of these green goals, and so I want that to be a part of our company as well. So I think success would be helping our customers achieve those goals, but fundamentally, it's just helping them to save money, reduce compliance risk, and improve safety reporting across the space.
I like that idea around enabling a green supply chain. I actually think that's a really interesting space because, or positioning, just, coming in your cold, so don't shoot me. But I think it's interesting because I think there's the business you are today, and then there's the one that you're becoming. And when you map that idea to macroeconomic trends, and you say, okay, in 5 years' time, we want to be doing 100 million a year, say, whatever, or we want to be worth 100 million. Like, what are the macroeconomic forces that are going to enable us to get there without having to be just a software supply chain business? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
if you were like, hey, we can do supply chain, for aerospace, part tracking, data sharing, it's like, okay, cool, dude. But like, you're one of 1,000 projects. I have 6 million parts to get into every fucking plane, and
Yeah.
I've got 50 planes to get off my production shit. Like, you are not important to me. I'm using that as a protagonist here in the story. But if you went to them and you said, hey, yeah, we do this, but here's why we do it, and here's why you should meet with us. So it's like, we're enabling a green supply chain for aerospace. Like right now, that's the thing. You know what I'm saying? So if you're talking to the right people, it's
Yep.
it's a different pitch, isn't it? It's kind of like saying, hey, here's how we can do it for you. You're still selling the same thing. You're just wrapping it in something that they are being asked to uh, uncover or to deliver, is to be more sustainable, to offset their carbon emissions or what have you. Do you know what I mean? Um, I,
Absolutely.
I think it's a very exciting space because I do think about like how much carbon goes out. It's like if I on my flight to New York, 4 hours, like how much carbon is put into the air, And I'm like, where's the electric plane? When's that
Yeah.
coming? You know, it is, it is coming. But this is where the aerospace industry from the outside anyway. I don't know what you know, but that certainly it seems to me like an interesting, a vision for where you could go in the future.
Absolutely. And I think what's also interesting too is that from that perspective, it's those trade-offs, right? Like, do I buy a new car that's electric, or do I keep this car that I've been using for 10 years that may have a gas turbine engine, and so, like, over time, what does that decision entail? And so being able to actually quantify those decisions could be incredibly powerful for supply chain managers who are managing hundreds of thousands of parts a year. And so, yeah, I think it's really great. And what's also, I would say, important at when we are selling our software to these companies is that why, right? It's right now what we are doing is important. It solves a problem, but the why and also the vision, the greater vision is like the aha moment. And it does take the right person in the room to understand it and to see it. But ultimately, those are the people that we want to partner
Absolutely, exactly. You want good customers, not good
with.
customers. You want
Yeah.
to actually enjoy working with them, not just
Totally.
take their money. But look, David, thanks for being on the show, dude. It's exciting. I think where you guys are at, like, really the world is your oyster. You've achieved a lot despite a lot, and that says a lot about you guys. So thanks for being on the show, man. It's been great to have you here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Matt. I really appreciate you having me.
Anytime. Cheers, everyone.